Hey YouTube, so I've been doing a little bit of research into Jack Hyles, John R. Rice, and Peter Ruckman. I've never really looked into these people too much before. I've listened to a handful of sermons from Hyles, but that's it. I've never listened to any Ruckman sermons. I just know he's a dispensationalist supposedly, but I never really cared to look into it. So I started doing that about, I don't know, a half hour, 40 minutes ago, something like that, and I stumbled across this video and I wanted to make a couple of comments on it because this is probably one of the most wicked things I've ever seen. This is Peter Ruckman's view on abortion. Just take a listen.
And the Lord God formed man the dust of the ground, body, breathed into his nostril the breath of life, spirit, and man became a living soul. Body, soul, spirit. And the Lord God formed man the dust of the ground. So his name is mud. The elements that are in the ground are in man. The elements that are in man are in the ground. And they're the identical elements. And the Lord God formed man the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. I teach that a baby is not a living soul until it breathes.
Now, up until that statement, everything that he was saying was true, right? Because he was quoting Genesis 2:7, which says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." So in regards to Adam, that was correct. But then he goes and he incorrectly applies this to babies and states that a baby is not a living soul until it breathes, which I'm going to comment on, but I don't want to answer a matter before I hear it, which I've already heard this, but I don't want to dilute, your mind or anything. So I'm just going to back it up 5 seconds and we'll give it a listen and then I'll take it from there.
Became a living soul. I teach that a baby is not a living soul until it breathes. I'm considered a great heretic for teaching that. But then again, if a man goes by the King James Bible, he's bound to be a heretic these days. And so I don't teach that abortion is murder, like the brethren do, and for that reason I'm considered a heretic for some of the brethren. But I'm an old dog. I've been around a long time. You know, I've observed that the Pharisees always went about matters of sex. Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause?
So he goes into all of these. It's a fallacious argument to say that because, first of all, because he's using the King James Bible, that somehow makes him impervious to being incorrect, which is ridiculous. And also that, well, let's just listen to what he said again.
For some of the brethren, the Pharisees always went about matters of sex.
So because the Pharisees had certain questions regarding marriage and sex and things like that, because they were very carnal minded, that a Christian who teaches, believes, and asks other brethren regarding abortion, that is somehow strange of them, is just a mischaracterization. And then he makes the appeal to, oh, well, I'm an old dog, I've been around a long time. Like that somehow makes him more correct than somebody else. That's not how truth works. So in Genesis 2:7, he's right that the Lord God formed Adam from the dust of the ground. That's his flesh. And that is actually why in Psalm 139 it says, "For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance," right? I believe that that's the elements of that make up the body of a man. "My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance." So I do believe that this is in regards to the dust and the dirt of the ground being the makeup of man's flesh. However, Adam was made of the dust of the ground, and he stood there as a fully grown man. He was not a fetus. He was not an embryo. He was not, he did not have the ability to move, right? Because he was just standing there. If you go to Ezekiel 37, I don't have this included. You know what? Actually, I'm just going to go there. So in Ezekiel 37, we have the valley of dry bones. It says, Ezekiel said, "So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet." Well, that's not very good because the breath came into them before that. Um, but here in verse 8, it says, before God told them to, before God told Ezekiel to breathe on them, it says in verse 7, "So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a shaking, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And when I beheld, lo, the sinews and the flesh came up upon them, and the skin covered them above, but there was no breath in them." So that is basically how Adam was, right? He had bones connecting bones, he had sinews and flesh and skin on top of that, but there was no breath in them. So there was no life. This thing can't move. Adam couldn't move. My wife is 6 months pregnant. That baby can move. To say that that thing is not alive and that that's not a living soul is absolute nonsense. And to equate Adam, which was made of the dust of the ground and wasn't moving, and the valley of dry bones that were called up from the dead without having the breath move upon them and go into them, that is not the same thing. Okay? Adam, before God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, is not the same thing as a child in its mother's womb. That is fallacious and that is stupid. And it's wicked as hell. And whoever called him that, whether it was Jack Hyles or whoever, I don't care who it was. You know, I don't care if the other person was a heretic. They would have rightly called him a heretic for saying this. That's absolute evil. Right? In Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, it says, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son." Now, here it's saying that she shall conceive. Now, that means receive seed. This is quoted in Matthew 1:23. It's directly quoted. In Matthew 1, it says in verse 22, "Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child." So according to that, conceiving seed, right, receiving seed within your womb as a woman is the exact same thing as being with child. So to say that that is not a living soul is straight out of the mouth of the devil. It says, "A virgin shall be with child and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel," which being interpreted is God with us. So that is one of the most evil things I've ever heard. In Jeremiah chapter 1, it says, "Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." So here we have Jeremiah in his mother's womb, before he was formed, right? Right at the moment of conception, right? That is an individual person. That is a person. The moment that seed hits that ground, that egg, that becomes a living soul at that moment. And there's a flash and a spark of light that lights every man, right? That is the moment that becomes a living soul. It is not, as Peter Ruckman says, when it takes its first breath of air, when it escapes the womb. It says, "Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee." That is before the child in its mother's womb was being formed, which is mentioned in Psalm 139, which says, "For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb." So the psalmist here in Psalm 139 is saying, "Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb," taking on personal identification prior to being born. How can it take on individuality before it's born if it's not a living soul? And this Ruckman guy, he goes, Well, it's not a living soul yet until it breathes the breath of life. It is an organism, he said, but it's not a living soul. So why then is the psalmist saying, Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb? He's taking upon himself to state that God is interacting with this individual, because he refers to himself as me. That is taking upon itself personal individuality. And then it says, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written. That's talking about his fingers, his arms, his legs, which in continuance were fashioned. What does it say in Jeremiah? Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. It says, which in continuance. Continuance when? During the 40 weeks of pregnancy. It says, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. This is, I don't know about any of his other doctrine. I've heard that he's like the father of dispensationalists and stuff like that. So that's blasphemous false gospel. Your view on abortion doesn't affect whether or not you go to heaven or hell, but this is just absolutely stupid, and it's absolutely evil. Being with a virgin, or, I mean, in our case, a woman, a wife, conceiving is synonymous with a wife being with child. And a child is, of course, a living soul. A child is not just an organism. That is absolute stupidity. Peter Ruckman is a wicked man for believing this. That is absolutely ridiculous.